just do a little housekeeping. My name is Catherine Greener, and thank you so much for joining today. I'm one of the co-founders of the Regenerative Recovery Coalition, along with Brenna Simmons-St. Onge and Hunter Lovins. Both you're going to hear from today. So today's meeting, our quarterly gathering, is really centered around one of our 8 fundamentals, the regenerative agriculture. So it's centered around regenerative agriculture and food systems. Specifically, we're going to be discussing healthy soils, healthy food, and healthy communities, which really are essential for regenerative recovery in the economy. At today's virtual meeting, you're going to hear from regenerative agriculture experts. And as a coalition, we're going to discuss what makes Colorado a place where when we take on an issue, we really demonstrate possibility. And together, we're going to explore the elements of regenerative agriculture and how our speakers and members are executing this work. So I also want to thank our sponsors who have made today's event possible. Thank you. So we have Oatly, who aims to drive a systematic shift towards a sustainable, resilient food system that empowers people to choose solutions that improve their lives and ensure the future of the planet in generations to come. And Villanova, committed to helping organizations build stronger, high-performing teams that work together to create a more equitable world. Montagna Distillers, located in Crested Butte. Rum on a mission, bottle by bottle and person by person, changing paradigms. Eco Products, really leading a zero waste future, a movement for this zero waste future and communities. And also the green solution. With over 21 locations, the Green Solution is a Colorado-based family-owned business who's proud to be among the most awarded companies in Colorado. The Green Solution focuses on understanding the social impact on this and other generations to come. We're grateful for the Green Solutions and our other sponsors for their support today and for their membership of the coalition. And so before I want to get started, I want to introduce Shannon Bean Scalesi, who is the lead of the Regenerative Agriculture and Food Systems Working Group for a land acknowledgement, remembrance for those lost to COVID, and for the equity announcement. So Shannon?
Welcome everybody to our meeting. I'm going to jump into our acknowledgements and just want to say thank you for being here. Alrighty. As Coloradans, we live on the unceded ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Ute nations. These lands were once the site of trading, gathering, healing, and stewardship for numerous First Nations people. We recognize First Nations people as the original stewards of this land, and we acknowledge that they haven't gone anywhere. They are still with us today. We acknowledge that the practices that we often refer to as regenerative agriculture and permaculture often originate from the land care practices of Indigenous communities here in Colorado and around the globe. We pay our respects to our Indigenous elders, past and present. We, together here now, take a moment to acknowledge the many legacies of colonial violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have brought us to our current moment. Our meeting today occurs, next slide please. Our meeting here today occurs within a very unique historical moment. We in the United States have lost and are grieving roughly 590,000 Americans as casualties of COVID. Globally, humanity has lost roughly 3.5 million souls. We recognize that we are all responding to this collective global trauma, and we hold a moment of silence to honor and to grieve. We acknowledge that racial justice, equity, and climate justice are inextricably intertwined, and that vulnerable people living with poverty, who are often Black, Indigenous, and people of color, often disproportionately bear the burden of climate change impacts and environmental injustice, and that these inequities are often due to the lingering effects of systemic discriminatory practices. We recognize that equity work is not only about race, but that there are inequities to be acknowledged and remedied throughout our Coloradan communities. We commit to self-transformation and to listening to all members of our communities. We do this in order to help ensure that our efforts to address climate change and to rewire our systems towards a more regenerative future also help secure rights to healthcare, access to healthy food, housing, and multicultural education. We intend that our work should help provide safety and security for those who hold intersectional identities, for Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples, for frontline immigrant and for farm working communities, for children, for the disabled, for LGBTQ families, and for people from all oppressed backgrounds. People who regularly experience privilege face no threat in helping extend safety and security to all Coloradan people. We are ready to let go of the systems that no longer serve us and to work together collaboratively to envision and pull forth a better world into being. Let the meetings, fun, and sharing begin. I believe Brenna goes next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brenna Simmons-St. Ange. I am the Executive Director of the Alliance Center, and I want to share with you just a little bit about who the Alliance Center is and what the Regenerative Recovery Coalition is up to. So the Alliance Center was founded really in 2004 with the purpose of bringing people together to solve systemic problems. And we work at the intersection of economic, social, and environmental solutions. And our work focuses on solutions that are so big, no one organization can do them alone. So we've built a vast network across the sectors of media, government, academia, business, nonprofit, and community leaders to first identify some of the largest problems that we face, provide thought leadership in what the solutions could be, and wherever possible, mobilize our network into action. Last year, when the pandemic hit, most leaders and institutions rightly focused on crisis management. The government dealt with the immediate task at hand while COVID ravaged the very systems that govern our lives. We focused on both the short-term and long-term recovery. We did a series of virtual think tank sessions last year, listening to hundreds of people from across the state, from ranchers to small business owners, to single mothers, everyday residents, to leaders and CEOs, about how the pandemic is changing their life and what is the future that we want coming out of COVID-19. And this work elicited over 1,000 solutions to really build our state forward. And we put these together into a roadmap that's an actionable report called the Guide to a Regenerative Recovery. Now, this is a recovery that will build a resilient localized economy. It will abundantly meet human needs and equitably provide clean air, clean energy, clean water, and clean food to everyone. And the demand for this future was so strong. Last summer, when we were doing the virtual think tank sessions, people kept asking us not to let it end with the virtual sessions, not to let it end with the report. People were hungry to make this our way of life, to make this vision come true. So we formed the Regenerative Recovery Coalition. It's about 7 months old now, so it's still a very young coalition, but it has almost 300 members. It has 21,000 active members of Colorado's workforce represented in our coalition, and about 2.8 billion in managed revenue of our member organizations. And the coalition represents hundreds of citizens, experts, nonprofits, communities, businesses who believe in a regenerative recovery and are working every single day to make it happen. The coalition drives action in 3 main ways. So first, we work with key decision makers and influencers in the state to really advance a regenerative recovery. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one example of that is actually working with our, I'm sorry, can we go to the 3 ways we drive action slide? One slide back. So one way that we drive action is working with our key decision makers and influencers in the state. And right now we're working to craft a project list for where state stimulus funds can be allocated that are towards a regenerative recovery. We've been working with key agencies and department heads within the Polis administration, as well as leaders in both chambers of the Colorado State Senate and the Colorado House of Representatives to craft this project list and then move those towards implementation once the stimulus funds are allocated. There will be a lot more coming on this throughout the summer, so please stay tuned in ways that you can get engaged. The second way that we drive action is really elevating the voice and the work of our members. So carrying with that previous example of the stimulus fund, we didn't create that list ourselves. We crowdsourced that through the coalition. You all helped create that. So we elevated the ideas and the voice of our coalition and connected them directly to the key influencers and decision makers in the state. We're also working to connect our coalition members to our media partners to help spread the narrative and the voices of our coalition across the state and hopefully beyond. There is so much amazing work going on in Colorado that part of our role as a coalition is breaking down the silos and connecting all of the different change agents who are advancing a regenerative economy. There's amazing work happening in the nooks and the crevices and the crannies all across the state. And part of our joy is finding that work and elevating it, and wherever possible, accelerating it. You'll hear from one example later this afternoon in the session with Zero Footprint. The third way that we drive action is admittedly the hardest and will take the longest to actually see the success of. So as part of this work, we're actually mapping the landscape in Colorado for what is a regenerative economy, what is a regenerative state. Where there are those examples, like I just said, we're elevating those and accelerating those. But we're also finding there are lots of gaps. And so part of our role is identifying what are those gaps. And these will become the foundation for pilot projects the working groups take on, implement, and continue to nurture over the years and months ahead. So those are the three main ways that we're working right now to actualize a regenerative recovery. So people ask all the time, okay, that's wonderful. So what does success look like? How will you actually know that we've succeeded? Success is honestly not sliding backwards in the months and years ahead. Instead, using this time of incredible transformation to build Colorado forward. So using those three examples I just gave of how we drive action, success is actually mapping what of the stimulus funds were influenced by our work. In the next year or so, we'll be able to tangibly see where Colorado allocated the $3.9 billion from the federal government for stimulus funds. And we'll be able to map that towards the recommendations. What percentage of our recommendations were taken? What percentage of the $3.9 billion actually went towards regenerative principles? So we'll be able to actually track that. Another way that we can track success is through our legislative wins. Right now in the Colorado legislative chambers, there are 9 pieces of legislation that are moving through that were direct results of recommendations we made last year to lawmakers from the Guidebook to a Regenerative Recovery report. So we can actually track what type of legislative progress are we making towards a regenerative recovery, not just in this session, but in the years ahead. And like I said, the hardest part to really implement and drive success stories from will be these pilot projects because there's a long arc of success there. But rest assured, once we identify what those projects are, and we're getting pretty close on a couple, we'll be able to look at what does success look like in each of those projects, track them and accelerate them. At the very highest level though, we're working to deliver transformation. And that's no easy task. The very systems that govern our lives need to be reimagined, reinvented, and redesigned. And it's messy work. Sometimes we're going to have quick visible wins like legislative success and policy passing. That's very tangible. We can count on that. Other times though, I have to be honest, the transformation is going to be so large and so unsettling that it might feel like we're slipping backwards as the ground breaks open and makes way for the new operating system. And we are here today because we know we have an obligation to transform our state and to be a model for the country, for the world, for not just an economic recovery, but also focusing on the social determinants of health, equitable recovery of good jobs, clean energy, local agriculture, and vibrant communities across the state. Now, to truly achieve this, we will need integrative solutions that are formed with a long-term vision of deep-rooted societal change. And much of this work is being embodied and led by our working groups. So there are 7 active working groups in the coalition. I won't list them all now. You can see them on the slide in front of you, but I will give you a brief update of what each of them have been up to. So first is circular economy and waste. This group is really assessing and mapping the state landscape for all things waste related. Next slide, please. And identifying where to best engage, where a policy priority is, and where other collaboration opportunities are. Our climate change and energy group has narrowed in on its top 4 priority areas that then will translate into projects. And they're working to advance several pieces of legislation during this session as well. Our equity working group is exploring what is a culture of equity and how to best embody this as not just a working group, but also through the entire coalition. They created the equity and land acknowledgements that you heard earlier in this event, and they're starting to settle into a new leadership structure. Our regenerative business working group has been defining what it means to be a regenerative company and what are some of the top priority projects that businesses can do to embody the regenerative principles. Our workforce development group has really identified its focus areas of hospitality, renewable energy, and regenerative agriculture. And next slide, please. And these are based on acute job loss in the state, being hospitality, as well as 2 of the most impactful climate solutions, the rapid transition to renewable energy and the ability to take carbon out of the atmosphere through regenerative agriculture. Our policy working group has defined both a process and a decision-making structure for which policy to support or oppose, and then how to mobilize a coalition once a policy stance has been taken. This session, I'll admit, we've been a bit more reactive because the policy group just formed recently, but over the course of the summer, the policy working group will start to shift its sights to how to be more proactive and strategic in future legislative sessions for 2022 and beyond. So that was a rundown very quickly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what 6 of our 7 working groups have been up to over the past few months. And last but not least is regenerative agriculture and food systems. Now, what I will say is this is a passionate group of change agents who are working to accelerate regenerative agriculture in Colorado, and they've been instrumental in making this event happen today. I will actually elevate Shannon Bean-Scalise's voice here next, as she is the leader of the Regenerative Agriculture and Food System Working Group. She also is a soil maker and co-owner of Hugo Rado Farms, and she'll be sharing with you more about what the Regenerative Agriculture and Food Systems Working Group has been up to. So I will leave you there, but I also just want to say thank you all so much for joining us, not just today, but for joining us on this incredible journey, because only by working together can we make a regenerative future happen. Thank you so much. Shannon, back to you.
Hello all, it is me again. So first I want to say thank you so much for being here, and for all of you that are here and have your screens turned off. We respect your privacy, but you are also welcome to show us your faces. No lie, I watched the screen to get a sense of how y'all are doing. Jumping into the working group, first thing I want to say is that our team is very much a team. It is very much collaborative. I think of myself much more as a facilitator than a leader or something like that. And we are definitely a working group, meaning it's more about showing up and figuring out what projects to prioritize and how to apply actions in a way that actually drive change, rather than kind of being armchair commentators on the state of Colorado. So top projects and what we've been up to these last couple of months. Again, everything is very team driven, and we wouldn't be able to do what we've done if we didn't have a culture of trusting each other, collaborating, and stepping up and kind of taking ownership of projects along the way. Zero Foodprint was the first project that we heard about that kind of all at once the entire team was like, oh wait, yes, this is something that makes sense. This is something we can get behind, and this is something that has an elegance of design that can actually help, one, educate our general Colorado population about what regen ag is, and 2, support farmers. We're going to hear more from Anthony Mint later on in the presentation about Zero Foodprint and its origins and its impact. Special shout out to Michaela and Tara Toole for really driving that project. The next major project has been more of a recurring theme. So when we talk about Food Hub and food sovereignty, we're really talking about a nodal food system. And a recurring theme of our conversations is as we identify a project that could work for our group to kind of get behind as a core project, we have a hunch that it will tie into fortifying concrete networks around us, the concrete food systems that are already in place. And so that's been a recurring theme in the background. More recently, we've identified a need for a regenerative agriculture farm tour. And that conversation has been really driven by David Carlson and Chris Holstrom as a way to really help build trust amongst and between our farming and ranching communities, our city folks, really helping create actual human contact between people that, especially in the past year, have only seen each other on the screen. So we're anticipating, hopefully in August, and hopefully kind of dovetailing with some other projects happening. The idea is a tour of different agricultural farms and systems so that people interested in what is Regen Ag anyway can take a look and see what is it actually like day to day on the farm or ranch. Our next one that I'm super excited about is our scope and vision refinement doc. So throughout this process, there's such a wide range of subjects that when you start thinking about how to rewire systems to help them bring more equity and more healing to our physical concrete systems and our social systems, it's pretty expansive. So this was an effort. Shout out to Tom Abode for really helping us and team for really helping us provide structure and refining what is within our scope, what are the pieces of the puzzle that we need to take into account, and how do we really grapple with this pretty expansive subject? And within that, how do we use that information to understand what projects make sense for us as a group? And then the last item is our regenerative agriculture policy. And so we know that, again, we kind of came late to the game because legislative season is already rocking and rolling. Michaela is an active member on our team. She's amazing. She also runs Colorado 350. Colorado 350 has been doing amazing efforts to drive beneficial policy for regenerative agriculture. So she has been keeping us up to date, letting our team know when to launch into action. And I do want to stress again that the only reason we are where we are is because we have collaborators who are ready to show up, to share, to cross-pollinate, and to get things done. Next slide. Awesome. We have a lot of ideas. We are definitely a group that ideates all the time. Projects that we know need more bandwidth. We really want to find a way to address the difficulties facing Colorado ranchers right now. There's a huge shortage in meat processors to the point of cows already being booked for being processed before they're even born, and entire fields being put down because there's no way to process them. So we know this is a need. We know that if we're clever enough about it, and if we network with the right people, we can help bring a solution that brings equity to the workers and empowers more entrepreneurs. So again, these are projects, if you're interested, join up because we need your help. We're really interested in forming relationships with people throughout a geographically representative Colorado, not just Denver and Boulder, but for the Plains, the Front Range, the Western Slopes throughout. We really want to address immediate food insecurity needs by getting funding to the front lines for nutrition purposes. We're really interested in creating an onboarding hub so that anybody who realizes they're interested in regenerative agriculture can come, kind of have a sense of who we are as a group and find a way to plug in with an organization doing work that they care about, even if it's not us. We want to find ways to support soil health, promote soil health efforts, projects, and education. And we essentially want to, again, expand the tent and welcome more people into it. Next slide, please. Awesome. So I mentioned the vision scope and refinement document that we've been working on, and that's been a team of about 6 people that meet for 60 to 90 minutes at a time. We were meeting every week over the course of like 5 weeks, and then we share our draft with our wider team for feedback. So it is a living document that's always changing. We are working to get this document ready for public facing use in July. But so far, the sneak peeks are that we've clearly articulated a mission to help guide our group. And that is to build and support a dynamic regenerative food system that is local, diversified, relational, and holistic approach to feeding Colorado by replenishing our lands, building healthy communities, healthy rural economies, and establishing the capacity to feed all Coloradans. Next slide, please. Awesome. We have like a whole section on each of these, but highlight foundational values, really diving into our historical and modern best practices, recognizing that where we are in this moment in time has historical context, and until we wrestle with that, we can't really move forward meaningfully. Embracing diversity and equity, that's a whole conversation. Building relationships throughout the Colorado community. We are spending a lot of time and energy talking about how do we share the vision for the future and how do we storytell about what this is, because storytelling is the biggest component that we see ourselves being able to support. Obviously, networking and helping highlight people and efforts that deserve more attention and funding and all those things, but all of that comes to storytelling. So if you're a storyteller, come join us. And then inclusion. Again, I've mentioned that a bunch, but really geographically representative and all that. Next slide, please. Awesome. One of the things you'll hear in our group a lot is that we trust the wisdom of the group and many hands make light work. Those are the two things that I think I say many times a day. So I want to have a special shout out to our regular attendees, our pop-in guests, and our diverse backgrounds. If you're thinking about linking up with people like us who do things like this, and a little insight into our backgrounds, we're native seed stock protectors, nutritionists, soil scientists, nonprofit leaders, county commissioners, farm owners, frontline workers, co-op managers, resource gleaning organizations, documentary producers, food hub operations managers, food system analysts, grant funders, pollinator advocates, and generally people who are committed to pulling a better future into today. So thank you to every single one on this list. We are who we are because you show up. And next slide, please. Awesome. Many hands might make light work. So as we move forward and think about what we want to move forward into, we've identified that we want to build relationships specifically with people who don't have the luxury of a midday 90-minute meeting, people who work regular, full-time jobs. We want to find a way to make it easy for them to plug in. We want to be more geographically representative, not just Denver Boulder, but our wider community. We want to connect with more farmers and ranchers, people that are part of the food systems. And we want to be a safe and welcoming place for Colorado's BIPOC communities. Our goals to support community are largely efforts in the next couple of months to make ourselves more accessible and more inclusive so that more people can join us. Our projects that we have our eyes on are really around building relationships with other working groups so we can work as a unit or as a many-faced organization moving forward. Moving our communication into Slack so we're more accessible to more people. And a stretch goal that I'm interested in is finding a way to send a 3-minute recap of our meetings to people that didn't get to come to the meetings. What we're stoked about and grateful for is community of people who show up and get things done. And who are open-minded and listen and think about complex problems. And we're really excited for the journey ahead. Next slide, please. Awesome, here's info. That's my 10-minute morning. Here's info about our upcoming meetings. Anybody who is interested, you're more than welcome to meet us June 4th, 3 to 4:30 p.m. The subject of that meet will be really hearing the geographical context of what is happening in Colorado in Regen Ag. We're moving to monthly meetings during summer months and then back to biweekly 90 minutes in September. And the two names I didn't mention were Kathleen Greener and Hunter Levins. Thank you so much to both of them for their participation in all of our meetings. And one of the things we're so grateful for is Hunter Levins, who is our next speaker. Hunter, thank you so much and tell us more.
Thanks so much. Have you guys, you got my slides? This is the regenerative recovery's principles. These are the core areas that we're working on. Many of them are obvious. Renewable energy, we have to have democratic institutions. Brenna mentioned workforce. We've spoken a lot about equal access, equity. Infrastructure is a big word these days, the circular economy. All of this is about leveraging partnerships, but we're here today to talk about food systems. The scientists tell us that we're in trouble. We are exceeding the planetary boundaries. And they point out many of the causes of this are the way in which we grow food. Similarly, many of the answers will come from the ways in which we grow food, that if we address the biosphere, the oceans, how we feed ourselves, ensuring that everyone on Earth is fed, we can leverage from that up to meet all of the sustainable development goals. What we cannot do is keep growing food in the way in which we have been doing. Agriculture as currently practiced is very energy intensive. We used to produce 2.3 calories of food for every 1 calorie of fossil input. It's now 10 calories of fossil input for every 1 calorie out. And what we cannot continue to do is release carbon into the atmosphere, continue to burn fossil fuels. Agriculture as currently practiced is incredibly water intensive. And as the drought now profound across the Southwest shows, we don't have a lot of extra water. As currently practiced, it's also very polluting. And Food and Agriculture Organization warns, under current practices in many parts of the world, we have 60 or fewer harvests left. The soil simply cannot sustain us. We're going to change. We can do this under our choice, or we can do it out of catastrophe. What we are learning, and the key to regenerative agriculture, is it's all about soil. Particularly, it is the carbon in the soil. The way we've been doing agriculture has been releasing enormous amounts of carbon, but it can also take carbon out of the air and put it back into the soil. Here's the difference. The grayish soil is, well, dirt. The darker soil is carbon. Plants take carbon out of the air, turn it into sugars, and put it into the soil. They also, in doing this, build in the soil the capacity to hold water. So 1 gram additional carbon, 8 grams water holding capacity. This also feeds the microbiological community in the soil, which is what gives fertility to the plants. Plants can have very deep roots. The guy holding up the kerns of wheat, this is perennial wheat. You never plow the soil. It comes up every year all on its own. The wheat above his head is annual wheat. See the difference in root structure. So Patagonia has teamed with the Land Institute to make long root ale. If we were to take and increase soil carbon 2%, just 2%, this would soak up all of the carbon that humankind emits every year. If we increase soil carbon any more than that, we are beginning to roll climate change backward. This is Gabe Brown, North Dakota corn, soybean, commodity farmer who was going broke. Because he was going broke, he said, look, I'll try anything. First, he went to no-till. He stopped breaking the soil. Then he planted cover crops, then deep-rooted cover crops. Then he had to get rid of the cover crops so he could drill seed his corn and soybeans. So he turned his cows out. The addition of this animal impact took him from a little under 2% soil organic matter to over 11%, and in some of his fields, over 15% soil organic matter. Gabe is rolling climate change backward at a profit. Gabe has these 5 principles of minimize soil disturbance, maximize crop diversity, keep the soil covered year round, maintain living root in the soil, and animal impact. What you see here are the principles of General Mills. Yeah, the big company which hired Gabe to teach them how to do regenerative agriculture, which they are now rolling out on 1 million acres of ground. They're not alone. Last summer, Nature Conservancy, Target, McDonald's pledged to start practicing this kind of farming. Walmart has pledged to become a regenerative company. Now, they have no earthly idea how to do this, but they're trying to figure it out. Microsoft said, we are going to go not just carbon negative or carbon neutral, but carbon negative. We are going to take out of the air as much carbon as our company has ever historically emitted using regenerative agriculture and nature-based practices. Then Bezos turned around and said, well, I'll spend $10 billion doing it. Now, he has no earthly idea how to do it, but again, he's figuring it out. Let's go the other side of the world to Andhra Pradesh, where farmers were committing suicide trying to practice heavily chemicalized, mechanized farming. They took Gabe Brown's 5 principles, added 4 more, and created what they call community managed natural farming. Diversity, always having the soil covered. And here are the results. Living root in the ground 365 days means they're producing food 365 days a year for a return on this 1 acre plot of $1,500. Compare that to the way farming had been done, which returned $618 for the 1 acre plot. It's being done in Africa. This is Million Belay, Dr. Million Belay, who took on the Gates-funded high-intensity production agriculture, which he pointed out failed. It did not deliver the increase in productivity or the increase in incomes. What he's doing, he calls agroecology. Same. The principles of not using poisons, keeping living root in the ground, adding animal impact are delivering productivity in Africa. This is a mobile pig pen. You pick it up, you walk it along, the pigs eat the grass. Behind, you plant your corn, sorghum. They have doubled, more than double, 5-fold increase the soil carbon. Again, every 1% soil organic matter is 5 to 10 tons of carbon and 20,000 gallons of water holding capacity. We're doing it here in Colorado, whether it be Corner Post Meats down south of Denver, or Parker Pastures over in Gunnison, or Indian Ridge in the Nucla area, or Flying Bee-Bar Ranch out in Strasbourg, or Sustainable Settings in Carbondale. Across the state of Colorado, farmers are switching to regenerative agriculture. You can do this at home. You can also be an enormous part of the solution. The way we produce and sell and eat food is incredibly, incredibly wasteful. If we cut waste in food by just 1/4, that would feed everybody on Earth. Restaurants can be composting. Are they? Most of them are not. And you are just about to hear of a program right here in Colorado that is doing exactly that. If we combine agriculture, this is called agrovoltaics, so, photovoltaics and agriculture. We did this on less than 1% of the agricultural land, we'd be able to power the Earth. And this is being done right here in Colorado, places like Jack's Solar Garden. So if we start to put these pieces together, we know what it takes to have regenerative agriculture. If we do this, we have the solution to feeding the world's people, to ending the climate crisis, to building vitality in our rural communities. So I'm incredibly honored to have been the coalition sponsor on the Regenerative Agriculture Working Group, and now to be able to introduce a program that that group and others have been working on called Zero Foodprint. This is something that you can start to become involved with that will make a difference right here in Colorado.
Over the last 40 years, 30% of the world's farmland has gone out of production. That's because the way the land has been farmed is it extracted the value out of it to the point when it's no longer productive. It's going to take investment and time to bring life back to the soil. The current food system incentivizes a race for yield. And yield doesn't capture nutrient density. Nutrient density comes from healthy soil practices. So this program is a way for a consumer to vote for healthy soil practices. Healthy soil grows the most nutrient dense and delicious food possible. It also happens to sequester carbon and have a major impact on climate change. I mean, we're talking about like a consumer revolution, right? I mean, we're talking about putting the power in the hands of consumers to choose what kind of food system they want.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anthony Mint. I'm a chef turned climate crusader. And in the past few years, I've gone from running basically a world famous party Chinese restaurant to a fine dining farm to table restaurant that Bon Appetit called the most sustainable restaurant in America for championing regenerative agriculture, to now a nonprofit, Zero Foodprint, which is leading public-private collaborations in California and Colorado to scale regenerative agriculture and expedite the change on acres. I want to say thanks to the Coalition and the Alliance Center, also to Hunter for such kind words and everyone's great work on this. So today I'll be explaining the program that we're running in California, as well as the one we've just begun with Phil Taylor and Mad Agriculture in Colorado, as well as the Alliance Center, Regenerative Recovery Coalition, and City and County of Denver and Boulder. So Restore Colorado, hopefully, will make it possible for Coloradans to take direct and meaningful climate action by building healthy soil on local farms and ranches. And we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and I'll maybe zoom a little wildly between global climate science and local action. And through it all, I really just want to appeal to your common sense. I'm hoping that the main takeaway from these comments is that we can solve the biggest problems through collective action and simply getting started today. So we heard from Hunter about the amazing potential of shifting from extractive to regenerative agriculture. And I think some of what we're doing is kind of operationalizing that in the food economy and basically creating a mechanism through which, instead of the food economy essentially being like 100% extractive and 0% regenerative, transform it into something positive and optimistic by simply adding in 1% economically for regeneration. And that's what this slide is about here. So this is some information from Project Grotto, which has analyzed, or brought together like 300 climate experts, analyzed a bunch of different solutions, the plausible adoption rates, the cost benefits of each one. And what's amazing is that they basically find that society can solve the whole climate crisis and lower global temperatures, and that it will cost about $29 trillion. And so on the one hand, that's a lot of money. But on the other hand, that breaks down to 1% of GDP each year between now and 2050. And so we can have temperatures going down by 2050 if we just take this simple action And I think what Project Drawdown has done is kind of break it down into almost like a playbook. So which actions should we take? How many resources should we allocate to each one? This graph is a kind of representation of the opportunity to reduce and remove. And so, instead of it being kind of like the top sources of emissions, this is the opportunity to solve the problem by funding these solutions. And so you'll see food and agriculture are basically among the top solutions, along with land sinks, which is what we're referring to here, carbon sequestration. And so although they're basically like the biggest opportunities, in many cases, they're almost like the least mobilized. And so that's exciting and optimistic. There's a big opportunity here to make major progress. And then Drawdown also finds that for each dollar invested in regenerative ag, you get about $40 of local benefit. So all the things Hunter mentioned, like farmer prosperity, water conservation, resilience, nutrient density. We can go to the next slide, please. And so, that's kind of like the macroeconomic perspective, what is happening. And then I think basically the microeconomic perspective is that, individual businesses are now starting to be able to operationalize this in Colorado and California. And so, there's a lot of great people and leaders in this group. And it's basically, in some ways like the definition of leadership. These are businesses that are taking a slight risk, getting behind a new but sensible concept and bringing it to life to create a new normal. And so in addition to, some amazing chefs and compost companies and catering companies and an online market, Subway Sandwiches in Boulder is now supporting regenerative agriculture by directly funding the change on acres. Next slide, please. And I'll get into how that's happening in a minute. But basically, what's exciting to me is to kind of hear regenerative agriculture mentioned in the same breath as renewable energy. And, I almost want to take it one step further and kind of say that regenerative agriculture is really analogous to renewable energy in the sense that, if you kind of start to think of farmland as one big biological solar panel, then it becomes clear that we can and must just get started improving the grid and not just simply buying from a few good farms. And so that was sort of the logic put forth in California as we began this collaboration. The state was already funding, carbon farming and regenerative agriculture, and they just wanted to scale up those efforts and start doing more. And so the proposal was to kind of follow the playbook of renewable energy, in which individual cities and counties are starting to go faster than the US government or the state government. And they're doing this by implementing community choice aggregation policy. And so that is, anecdotally very simple. Citizens add $5 on the utility bill, maybe they're opting in, maybe they're opting out, but it's going into a program that is improving the grid. And nobody needs to take out a loan for solar panels, nobody needs to climb on the roof. It's just part of a seamless new normal that's happening very quickly through collective action. That whole concept, improving the grid and CCA, that just began in like 2015, basically, after a decade or more of policy work to establish those frameworks. And so in many ways, we can solve this. It's just a matter of getting the right systems in place. And so our hope here is to create essentially kind of like that option, that CCA option, where $1 per month on the waste hauling bill could just be funding compost application and scaling up regenerative ag very quickly. Leading businesses could be opting in to help make the effort go more quickly. We can go to the next slide. And so one of the major breakthroughs that is making this possible is actually coming out of Colorado State University. So they have created what is called the Comet Planner. And it's basically another kind of more rigorous version called the Comet Farm Tool. And it's basically a modeling tool that allows, citizens, scientists, farmers to estimate the carbon sequestration that is happening from a farming project. So in this screen capture, there's a picture of a compost application project. This is one we actually funded in California on a really sustainable grass-fed dairy that is going one step further by applying compost to take even more carbon out of the atmosphere more quickly. And basically, this tool is almost as simple as a mortgage calculator, where you're kind of just popping in a few variables, compost from whatever facility, and 23 acres, and this takes 99 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere each year. And so zooming back out again for a second, I want to just appeal to everyone's common sense again for a second. In the US food system, we are systematically basically taking all of the organic matter, trapping it in plastic bags, locking it out of the soil where it releases toxic methane in landfill. And then meanwhile, like, food is starting to become less nutritious. People are starting to manifest like chronic disease and obesity, and the soil has less carbon and organic matter. And so, it's almost like one gigantic biodiesel spill is going on, and we have to just reverse it by funding the compost infrastructure creation, getting it back onto healthy soil on farms and ranches. Some soil scientists are estimating that each ton of compost can help sequester 2 to 9 tons of carbon when applied to farmland and rangeland. And so again, like, when you think about these kinds of problems, it starts to become clear that it's not a matter of like a few people buying the good cherry tomatoes at the farmer's market. It's about like really structural shift that governments even want to have happen, but don't have the budgets for. So it's really a case where we can all come together and work on this. Next slide, please. I'm going to zip through this because it's a little bit complicated, but basically someone commented about, I think Shannon, about kind of an eloquent design. And so there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes to basically make it possible for citizens to just, add 1 penny for each dollar spent and then have that going towards regenerative practices. And so each row on this chart is a farmer or rancher applicant who's basically proposing a scope of work. They're saying like, I want to apply compost and do some mulching and tree shrub establishment on 18 acres using the COMET model. Program and scientists and farmers can estimate that this project would take about 1,200 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. The applicant is seeking $14,000. They're working with a local technical expert in Colorado. That would be Mad Agriculture for now. And there's basically a total cost to the project. And so we're basically able to almost like break it down to the climate ROI of each project. And so this column on the right is just the dollars per ton of carbon removal. And so we're ranking the applicants by that and then just funding as many grants as we can. And so what this really is meant to convey is that the approach is really a systematic approach to improved land stewardship. Again, kind of like improving the grid. And so, whether governments are putting in money or, a citizen is paying 10 cents extra for a sandwich that costs $10, it's all basically going to transition acres of farmland towards regenerative. And again, whether it's a regenerative producer like Marcus McCauley kind of doing one more project or a conventional producer taking their first steps, in many ways, this is like, to my knowledge, like the first opportunity that citizens have had to directly incentivize healthy soil and improve the food system. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to close with like, almost like a quick overview, which is to say, I'm a big supporter of the farm to table movement. Having essentially put my life savings into a restaurant running, advocating farm to table, and yet at the same time, that helped me understand the limitations of just buying the good stuff and making good choices within what is almost like a fundamentally broken system. And so Zero Foodprint and Restore Colorado represents a table to farm movement that complements the existing farm to table movement, but makes it possible for everyone to directly invest in healthy soil. And so I've included a few calls to action here for everybody. Please encourage local businesses to join Zero Foodprint. I'm putting compost 3 times here in a row with exclamation points, because I think that's almost like the most visceral and direct action that citizens can take. If you have the option to compost, please do it. You can do that in Denver with Scraps Mile High. We also have a new Zero Foodprint member, Wampost, in Aurora. So please opt in and start composting. You can even just sign up to make a direct donation for $10 a month or something like that to projects like compost application and windbreak planting at McCauley Family Farm. and Mad Agriculture has lined up a number of other pilot projects. If you want to learn more about regenerative ag, than this meeting, I highly encourage you to watch the movie Kiss the Ground. It's super optimistic and basically just tells like an almost common sense but really new story for a lot of people. And then the last is at this moment we're running a promotion, so you could buy dinner or buy something from a zero footprint business restaurant and say thanks for restoring healthy soil. And then right now, and while supplies last, you get a coupon for a free bag of EcoGrow compost. You may have to kind of ask them for it or something, and it's redeemable at local Ace Hardware stores. So at this point, I will pause and turn it over to Robbie and the next group, who will be moderating a panel with our collaborator on Restore Colorado, Phil Taylor from Mad Agriculture.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I know that there were some questions that several people have had for you. And if it's all right, as a member of the working group, we'll just connect you with the questions. I know that you have a hard stop, and we're very, very grateful for your time today and being able to share Zero Footprint with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So up next, as Anthony just said, we have a terrific panel. So please keep your comments and questions coming. There's been a great dialogue in the chat. And hopefully we're going to have some time in this panel to continue to answer questions. So with that, I'm honored and deeply happy to introduce the moderator of our panel, Robbie Vitrano. So aside from being a deep thinker and poet and passionate supporter of regenerative agriculture, he's a key contributor to the Coalition's Advisory Committee, as well as the Regenerative Agriculture and Food Systems Working Group. I probably could take up a lot of time in your whole bio, but just briefly, Robbie's currently the CEO of Innisfree and Good Spread. He sits on various boards and is the founder of several companies, including Trumpet and Naked Pizza. With that, Robbie, I'll let you take it away and introduce your terrific panel.
Thanks, Catherine. Joining me today, and really the stars of the show today, are Roberto Meza, who is the co-founder of Emerald Gardens, the East Denver Food Hub, and several other organizations that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and Phil Taylor, who is a co-founder, executive director, CEO, principal poet of Mad Agriculture, which touches so many of the companies and organizations that you're hearing from today, and so many that you've probably heard of the good work. Before I jump into this, I do want to maybe just throw out a little bit of an ad for the group of people that are joining us. And it's sort of the personal journey that many of us are on. We are into this with, I think, a great deal of intention and desire and curiosity to learn more, to participate more meaningfully, to do good work, to influence others. It is a learning journey by any measure. It is probably not filled with silver bullets, although you're hearing some things here today that hopefully encourage you in terms of some of the actions we can take to move forward with. But my own personal journey has been one of stumbling forward. I mean, very much so. And the two gentlemen that are joining me, many of the people on this call, are people that have very generously assisted in that journey. And so for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I really want to encourage you to step in. There's so much more where that came from. So be a part of that when you can. And then the other frame I'll offer as we get into it is simply this, that I would also assume that most of the people on this Zoom call are people that probably on some level or another can finish one another's sentences. There's a lot of folks here that are cut from the same cloth, that find yourself in these kind of high consciousness conversations and participation. But as you've heard time and time again, and I think Shannon puts it beautifully, the goal here is to build a big tent. And we talk about inclusion and diversity, and that really is so fundamentally important to us. And the tools that are necessary to do that, they don't come easy. We all know that. It's practice and it's work. So one of the things that I was most excited about in reaching out to Phil and Roberto is that they are living examples, prototypes on a day in, day out basis, probably as many mistakes as successes along the way, but in reaching out to diverse groups and moving this forward. And for that, I am immensely grateful. They inspire and they instruct us. So with that, I'll get into a little bit of an introduction, and I'm gonna let these guys take it away. Phil, I'm gonna start with you. I know the organization was sort of taken from, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front Manifesto and so much of the work of Wendell Berry that inspired you. As an organization, you've touched a lot of different areas of agriculture, society, economics, and I know you've learned by doing. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what got you to this place and where you are today in leading Mag Agriculture?
Well, thanks, Robbie, for the awesome introduction, and I've really enjoyed the gathering here. So many awesome people participating, and I'm full of gratitude to be here and invited to share a little bit about our story. Man, Mad Ag it's one of those things where I think it's my life work. It's taken me 38 years to get to this point where, as you said, stumbling forward. I mean, my goodness, the amount of light and dark cycles that I've gone through in my life of various iterations of understanding first sort of the sort of fundamentalism I grew up in, and taking courage and sort of going through a soulful evolution of that, and just watching myself evolve somewhat unconsciously has been such a joyous and challenging process, where I feel like several things are ringing true right now around my journey. And what got me here is sort of the tether through it all, as I was taught at an early age to really spend my life discovering who I am and what my gifts are, and how to use them in service of the earth and humanity. And I feel like in every step forward, I've strived for that. And Mad Agriculture was really born out of sort of a coming home for me. I had spent a long time in academia as a soil biogeochemist. I'd traveled to Asia and Africa and Latin America and throughout the US studying soil ecology. And I sort of woke up over a number of years realizing that my cerebral work wasn't tapped into my heart work. My fingernails weren't dirty, and I wasn't moving culturally in the way that I wanted to. And so as I sort of reawoke my full self, that poetic side, I realized I needed to cut the cord from academia and do something more expressive. And that really was the genesis of Mad Ag, and I think embodies the ethos and the spirit of the organization.
Well, it seems like you cannot hear about an inspired project, just like we're hearing from Anthony with Zero Footprint, that you guys haven't had a chance to be a part of that, working on perennial grain projects with big brands, with small people like Marcus and all the folks in between. And I think people are grateful for that. When you meet the team, you understand that you are an advocate for the farmer, first and foremost, and the soil and the land that they steward, but also that culture and that spirit that comes with people who take that responsibility upon themselves. And then I think the other piece, which comes up time and time again, and I think we're hearing from it, Hunter, you talked about the big brands that are participating, is you're connecting those dots on the economic side. So that sort of poetry and prose piece is such a vital part of bringing the agricultural movement forward in terms of better food systems.
Yes.
And I'm grateful for the way that you stitch those things together. You can walk into some pretty august rooms and probably weird them out half the time, but it seems like you get some good work done when it's all said and done. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
Roberto, your name comes up every time you talk to someone in this greater community, this ecosystem, and you're somewhere up there with sort of legendary, I think, kind of the chupacabra and the mythical sort of spirit whisperer of so many. And the opportunity I had to get to talk with you and hear about the great things that you do and the work that you bring to so many organizations has been remarkable. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your journey working as an artist and ultimately choosing agriculture as sort of your canvas, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Robbie, and thanks to the Regenerative Recovery Coalition for inviting me. Yeah, I have a similar kind of meandering path as many of us do to try and understand the world in a more creative, poetic way. And that's really what got me into art. It was the only medium that allowed me to migrate between different disciplines, different frameworks, so that I didn't have to specialize in biology or psychology or anthropology, but I could use them as tools to break down the world into more digestible pieces of information that I then could reconfigure to present a different way of thinking about our communities, our economy, our politics. Being able to use mediums to translate experiences has always been fascinating to me. And that's where I really felt the most inspiration and motivation and applicability of a lot of my passions and commitments to social justice. So when I found that tension in academia as well, really preventing me from reaching the communities that I wanted to reach because I had to do art in a specific way to meet my grades. It really kind of made me rethink my path a little bit. And that's when I started to kind of take a step back and do some soul searching. But I never really relegated my experiences to a corner. They've moved along with me, even as I engaged in other spaces. And when I came to farming, it brought together so many things and gestured towards solutions and answers to questions that I kept searching for. So now my art is farming and ecosystem, food system design. I really am using those as mediums, as tools to present the picture of possibility for our communities, of a new way of living that meets the needs of our communities, our farmers, addresses social equity, regenerative agriculture. I woke up with a phrase in my mind recently. If regenerative agriculture can heal our soils, then regenerative economies can heal our communities. And similarly, as we try to sequester carbon, my role is now to sequester capital. We're trying to keep it in our communities, trying to build pathways so that it flows like water and nurtures the communities that really need it.
There's so much, Roberto, in the idea of microgreens as Trojan horse that it has so many directions to it. Shannon asked the question about what part of the story about regenerative agriculture and food sovereignty are you most excited to help tell and actualize? Maybe you can give a few examples of ways that you're bringing that specific topic forward in your work.
Yeah, I think these have become lenses for how to demystify food systems and to make industrial agriculture a little more manuable, a little more manageable to be able to be transformed. What I'm working on now is looking at a resonance between the East Denver Food Hub, which is our social enterprise organization that is connecting local farmers to communities via appropriate values-based equitable food distribution models, and the year-round farm that we're tending and cultivating emerald gardens on the Eastern Plains. We're kind of an anomaly over there. Surrounded by monoculture, we're growing microgreens in a greenhouse, and now venturing into the conversation between controlled environment and wild environments and what that means in our food ecosystem. But it really has become a way of understanding the world in terms of people. For most of us, we wear so many different hats that they kind of meld into our own sense of self. And we forget that we're humans, right? Sometimes we speak only from the perspective of our organizations and not from our hearts. And my role has been to reestablish that connection, that glue that holds us together, that builds relationships and bridges rural to urban divides. And how do we do that in a way that is self-aware, that acknowledges a history, a reckoning of a questionable progress or development of agriculture that is predicated on stolen land and forced labor. And that reckoning has to happen when we begin to discuss equity and capital and power and agency. But at the root of it all, you know, we're humans trying to connect with one another and to bring about a healing. And it's been really interesting to see how that can happen within the food system, to show people that, you know, we all eat and we all need to ensure we're all pretty much farmers in our own capacity, right? We have to nourish ourselves and our communities. We're all cultivating something, and being able to look at how that builds our connection and how that develops our relationships now gestures toward a new set of values that we need to continue the work that we do. A lot of this has to do with just, you know, experiencing the world as purely as possible and not allowing preconditioned norms or understandings to colonize the way that we actually experience things. So it's been really fascinating to see how that plays out in terms of food sovereignty, where for me, that's really what we're doing here. There's a community of people coming together to understand the problem, to brainstorm solutions. And now we are able to define our own food and farming ecosystem that is culturally appropriate and is ushering the longevity of agriculture.
And I'll ask you, Phil. I mean, the topic of food sovereignty, it can raise tension. It can be maybe difficult for people to fully understand. And for some people, it comes very natural and innate. How do you bring food sovereignty into your work?
Roberto, just loved what you said. I was soaking it up. Really love your perspective and how you're weaving so many elements of equity and justice and healing into one motion and narrative, and that new story. Kudos for that beautiful language. For me, food sovereignty really shows up in our work where we are helping farmers figure out how to exit the industrial food system. We work with farmers that are sort of woven tightly within this system of commodity markets, within financing, within subsidies, within inputs. And no matter how frustrated they are about the system, there's no way to break free of it. They're sort of shackled by all the elements. And it often takes a lifetime to even see the systems we're a part of, and another lifetime to sort of start reworking them, whether it's a reform or whether it's a revolution. And so for a lot of the farmers that we work with, which we focus on large scale commodity type farms, we have sort of three ways of helping them achieve a new level of independence, a new level of freedom, a new level of agency, where they are empowered to connect with community members and markets and capital on their own terms. And for me, that sovereignty is really about, for us, creating the container in which the stewards that we work with find that agency and empower and alignment from within that deeper set of virtues that Roberto was talking about. You know, a lot of times it requires a little scrubbing off of the light bulb and getting the farmer, you know, working with the farmer to come out of that vital or that vital energy, that survival. The rain's coming. What seeds am I going to buy? You know, is the farm going to survive after Papal dies? Like, that's where a lot of farmers exist, that kind of energy. And so we really try to use our sort of stewardship approach is to open and awaken a broader considering. It talks about story and lineage and invites really big questions that are almost impossible to answer. Like, what does the land need us to be in order to thrive? When you're on a corn and bean farm in the middle of Iowa and you ask that question, it brings up massive ponderings. Sure. And other questions like operating on stolen land and being not only a relic of, but also a perpetuation of modern colonialism is something that's very difficult to face. I mean, I feel like in the past year, my level of unlearning has outpaced my learning. Like what I feel like
Yeah,
I
know
can
exactly what you
offer,
mean.
you know, what I feel like I can offer has suddenly swung into this massive receptive. Like I literally sat down on this call and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say. I've been really sort of swimmy, you know, that feeling of like, whoa, how do you move with uncertainty and yet remain confident? And I go back to my sort of virtues and my moorings, and I go back to the new story and those virtues of reciprocity and goodness and you know, all of that stuff to sort of ground me. But wow, we are in a massive upheaval right now for great reason. And I think we need to hold that urgency and patience for, again, creating authentic relationships. That relational piece, which I heard through the conversation earlier, I think is just critical. And, you know, Roberto, we've been working with him, the East Denver Food Hub, Tanner, and collaborating with farmers and moving edible dry beans. And so new relationships, new economies, new connections that are more thoughtful of the soil, more thoughtful of our communities, more thoughtful of the lovers of land and food. It's happening, right? And these are just these are the seeds of sort of the revolution as I think about it.
Well, I mean, what I'm hearing so much, I mean, and it's not unusual, Phil, for you to speak. And I mean, you can hold that you're a pluralist, right? I mean, you can hold those ideas of confidence and uncertainty. And there's so much richness in that tension. You know, when we were talking about this, Catherine threw out that idea of, you know, how do we, sorry about this, that's the outside. That's how do you hold the white space, right? The white space that exists with the proper care and concern for the people in it, and to move people to that new place. And I'm just wondering, I know, again, it's not prescriptive in this way, but just examples and methods of that. So Roberto, you know, we talked a bit about this. There are probably rooms you walk into where there's a great receptiveness to this. There are people in some state of either awareness, consciousness, or need, and there's an immediate sort of collaboration. And then there's other folks that are very uncomfortable with perhaps this, and as Phil kind of alluded to, sometimes just subject to things that are very tough, very immediate. Are there methods that you use, or maybe anecdotes you can share about ways to bridge that?
Yeah, well, actually, I really like what Phil said about unlearning. This process of unlearning is as or even more valuable than the process of learning. And I feel like that has been so fruitful and useful for me because you know, when we walk into spaces where we're not accepted or received, we tend to speak from our emotions. And sometimes that's not the best place to address a budding relationship with somebody with a different viewpoint or different perspective. And so being mindful of just being able to connect with them, to hold that space for people who are not quite there yet, has been really critical for me to try and develop that compassion with folks that may be on the completely other side of things, right? But we need them. They're part of our community, right? They're going through the healing process as well. We all are, because change only happens when we are not in our comfort zones. And I think that we need to be caretakers of each other when we're going through this process together. So yeah, sometimes when I go into meetings or I'm having a conversation with an executive director who is still, you know, in that old paradigm, you know, it's kind of like we're trying to get them to cross over, to transition, and to cultivate that compassion with them facilitates the transition, the crossover. So that has been very critical for me to find the language that resonates with people. Right now, we're going through a capital campaign to try and raise funds for our growing business, and being able to convey a perspective or a future that may at certain angles look very idyllic and utopic. You know, sometimes we get characterized as idealist or perhaps too radical, but we have expressions of how that works. You know, I see pockets of success. So what we're trying to do is build that foundation, that resonance, to scale that success, to really allow it to support the entire state and perhaps beyond. So it's finding ways of connecting with people using the language of trust and transparency and the value of building that social relationship and conveying the paradigm that, you know, we all win if we really take care of each other. So it's as much about holding the difference of where we come from as it is about building that commonality.
That's great. That really is great. And I want to come back to the idea of how we think about the many interests within our state, which is kind of our one primary focus. Susan, I think you're off mute. You have a question that you'd like to ask Phil or Roberto?
No, not a question. I had a connection to what they were both saying. And in our county, San Miguel County Open Space Commission, we have a Payment for Ecosystem Services project and trying to help farmers and ranchers with monies to help do more regenerative practices. And that the tricky thing is finding that spot, the middle ground where they respect what we're trying to do and we respect their experience as a farmer or an ag land manager. And I just was making that connection between those relationships that have to get built. And sometimes they don't trust what we're trying to do to offer them money to improve their ecosystem, whether it's regenerative ag or, you know, soil health or whatever it is. Anyway, just that's an important relationship between the people with the ideas and the monies to try to help and the people who are maybe not trusting the government, so to speak. And so that's where we are. Anyway, the idea about sovereignty and that came to my mind of something that we're experiencing and have been over the many years. That important relationship of respect on both sides and learning from each other and honoring the experience that a longtime farmer or rancher might have, while also, you know, sharing best practices.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And I think so much of what you touched on was the inspiration for this discussion, and, you know, my eagerness to get Phil and Roberto to spend a little bit of time with us, because they are doing, you know, they lead with their chin on so much of this conversation, bringing themselves into these conversations of tension. And that transition aspect that you remark upon, it's so complex for so many. You know, identity and ego is tied up in it. You know, economics are tied up in it. Heritage is tied up in it, and that sort of oftentimes polarizing effect that can take place. You know, the ones that are being lectured to can make this work that much more difficult. Phil, in your work, working across the state and outside the state, what are some of the techniques, methods that you found useful in bringing people into the conversation?
Man, it's such a big topic. It's about sort of like human nature and behavioral change, alignment.
Yeah.
You know, it's about product market fit in many ways. It's about so much. With that comment and with what Roberto is saying, there's a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, which has stuck with me for a long time as a communicator, which is, it's the responsibility of the communicator to know the language that the listener needs to hear in order to find resonance with shared values. And it puts a lot of responsibility on those that want to be heard to understand the language, the culture, the values, the norms, in order to find resonance. And rather than, as Carol Sanford would put it, there's a antagonistic force and there's a pro force, and that's usually that farmer that's got the big hat, and here's the carbon farmers that want to try to get something going on the ground. Like, what's the reconciling force that gets you to emerge co-creatively out of the antagonism that's so natural? And that comes with a lot of really interesting approaches, like not being judgmental, you know, rigorously and ardently non-judgmental. And so we have a kind of a approach at Mad Ag that anyone is welcome to the regenerative revolution. It doesn't matter what definition you use. It's about any step toward healing your relationship to yourself, to others and the land is a regenerative act. It's a process, not a destination. All are welcome. And that long on-ramp, I think, creates that big tent sort of strategy that I think we need as a civilization. And at the same time, mad agriculture, you can't, no single person can serve everyone across that ramp or, that sort of, that exit. And so we're really targeted about who we serve and why. And we ensure that there are folks that share the same values as us and can meet us with where we think we can bring value and create change. And so we get really specific about that, and the way that we work is we empower farmers that want to move to regenerative and organic agriculture. And we do that through this combination of land and business planning, access to equitable capital, and values aligned markets. And that system we bring together. And if it's something that's overly scientific, or it's about policy, or it's about carbon markets, or it's about all these other things that are flooding the ecosystem right now, we just choose not to do them. And we, as much as we can, we point people in the right direction, or we connect them. And getting back to that community piece where there's so much amazing, the whole thing is blooming and emerging like a wildflower field. And you can't be every wildflower. So sort of know what you're good at and know where you want to grow and sort of lean in that direction. And then rest on others and bring others into the collectivism that's required to really give this thing shape.
I mean, as you sort of toggle back and forth between the comments from the group as well as from you two, you're sort of obviously aware of the fact that there are relational skills to be aware of in practice. And then as you just alluded to, Phil, I mean, you guys have a strategy, a framework that probably through trial and error that you've developed over time, and being aware of that. I think, you think about those sort of uncomfortable conversations that take place. And it's interesting to me, and this gets probably again into a lot of complexity. In this last year in particular, a much greater awareness about diversity in terms of LGBTQ rights and BIPOC rights. And yet at the same time, we're having some real difficulty, in our state, the Front Range, Western Slope, Eastern Plains kind of conversation. So one question that's thrown out there, which I think is a terrific one, Roberto, I'll throw it to you, is, for city people coming into this, how can they willingly engage in this in a way that connects with the people that produce their food and not get lost in it and create that connection?
It is a great question, because I've recently been thinking about the power of the consumer to affect social change. Right now, there is a very important piece of legislation, and that's the Ag Workers Bill of Rights. That's SB 2187, that addresses basic human rights protections for farm workers. To this day, farm workers and domestic workers are excluded from basic protections the way that other workers have in different industries. So the main kind of pushback that we get is that it's going to be too costly for farmers to offer those basic protections due to the slim margins that they're already working within. And that's a symptom of the industrial food system, right? It's been incentivizing, high profit over people. And now is time to really come to terms with that. We really are now closing the loop, closing the gap, to the point that, we're trying to support new practices that may have a higher price point so that their farmers can remain viable, so that they can become proper land stewards and be able to treat their workers and their livestock with dignity. And I think the consumer has a big role to play in that, right? But there's this little gap of transition where the cost of food sometimes makes it exclusionary for low-income communities to access it. But there is this wonderful opportunity for all of us to reimagine how we can find ways of allocating capital and subsidies to the right kind of farming. Too often we've been subsidizing the wrong kind that has been perpetuating all of these challenges and all of this pain that we feel. And now there might be some avenues for rectifying and course correcting that. as a food hub, what we've been noticing is our growth has been dependent really on folks that have been adopting the new vision, the new local food economy that has dignity at its center. And now we're seeing this spiraling out into all of the different things that we need to do. And Phil, I'm kind of contrary in the sense that I try to do everything. We're addressing policy. You know, we're really trying to hack the investment system to really become more transformative and more equitable. And at the same time, running the daily operations of getting food from one place to another. But because we're involved in every single link of the supply chain and beyond, we have a wonderful opportunity to develop the intersectional framework necessary to substantiate the understanding and to be able to communicate that to our communities and our consumers. So one of the things that our customers, for example, at the farmers market are now doing is engaging in deeper conversations that go beyond the transaction, that now build relationships with our food hub and with the farmers that we work with, so that they see themselves as active participants, not just recipient consumers of the food system. And I think together that consciousness, that awareness will be able to solidify the foundation to be able to build upon that and move beyond the current challenges and obstacles that we're facing. So I think the first thing is just study up, you know, bring yourself to consciousness of what's really happening and do the due diligence to understand how we become more active and more of caretakers, all of us, for a dignified local and regional food ecosystem.
Beautiful and great instruction. You know, that notion of how we enter into those conversations, what our own responsibilities are as we make our way through this information and how it changes us, and you know how we try that out, you know, with this new awareness. It's so vital. And you know, I spent a lot of time looking at the market, and so much of my work is, as Phil alluded to, that idea of product market fit. And there's so much energy put around that, you know, to create transactions. And it would be nice if maybe just a little more of that was applied towards this idea of that elevated consciousness and participation, collaboration. You guys work with a lot of partners across the board, as I mentioned earlier. Can you talk a little bit about, Phil, about partnerships that work? What's been the structure of partnerships that's really allowed for you to get some movement?
Oh my, trust and relationships and being fully human, like Roberto said. You know, singing together, maybe drinking some whiskey together. You know, spending time in a Winnebago together. You know, I mean, being out and volunteering and having your hands in the ground. I mean, that's really where the magic happens. And so all of our best partners, I mean, I'll talk to Restore Colorado. We're really aligned with Zero Foodprint and a variety of other partners, a lot of folks involved in that project. And, you know, Anthony and I have known each other for years, with no pretense of working together. We used to eat at Mission Chinese in San Fran when I was out there visiting my brother and working at Stanford. And we would connect and swap ideas. And, you know, 5 years later, we're saddled up hip to hip in the yoke on this project, and it's an awesome partnership. And so I think the great partnerships come out of that. I mean, it's just sort of like build your network, which is a really boring way of being in community. But, you know, it's probably the best advice that I've had. And being a fairly social person, I can lean into my gifts, which is having fun with people and being poetic and talking philosophy. And then the best part about it is taking those radical ideas and putting them to work. For us, ideas without action are dead. And so we really are action oriented. And that means a lot of failure and learning, and a lot of micro steps, you know, are required. Going, ooh, that didn't work. Ooh, like a lot of sort of, rather than asking for permission, sort of getting your hand slapped here and there. And yeah, I think that's just part of it though. I mean, that's the creative urge that's required. We can't do it alone. We have to lean in and find other people in the movement to build and be in partnership with.
Yeah, there's certainly some magic to you know, the brown liquor and bringing out the string instruments. That seems to have at least started a good conversation on many occasions.
Yes.
But I think, again, I would imagine amongst the 90 or 100 and so people we have joining us today, that I would bet that a lot of these people find themselves in situations and conversations because they make this effort to learn, informing friends and colleagues. I think all of us probably have those little stories where people are on the journey and genuinely interested in the things that we're learning. And those are really profound little opportunities, probably to listen more than talk, but to hear what people are curious about and that what they're arriving at. There's so many forces in our society today that are urging us towards this and maybe providing us with some more tools. Good storytelling is abounding, as Anthony mentioned, with Kiss the Ground, using celebrities to tell the story and working at the local level, in every direction. And I think that's encouraging for those of us that are trying to tell those stories. And I do hope that, the other piece to that, again, that sort of opportunity, responsibility, gift of being in a meaningful conversation with someone is the awareness not to poke the finger too hard in their chest. There's some things you might know. People are coming to this. There's so much to be revealed about how people have gotten here over time, and we're working on it. This group, the Regenerative Recovery Coalition, also works at a political level, and that work matters. If you look at big movements, there's these sticks and carrots throughout the system where people educate themselves, become more aware of it. They work at a policy level, and as we kind of go out on this, as a non-native Coloradan, I'm from Louisiana, where we've got our share of challenges. It is such a blessing to be in a community that cares so much, so deeply, and also has such an outsized influence on this country and perhaps the world, that's able to bring together the rich heritage of the West and the behaviors, are maybe our greater attention to the consciousness of what came before and what violations have taken place, our sanctity for the natural environment and how that's being put to work, and the brains that are also not ignoring the fact that people have to, put a meal on the plate of their family every night, and making sure that people have the means to survive within it. And so again, as somebody that's relatively new to the game, I want to encourage the folks that are participating in this to understand that so much of what you do every day is actually influencing behaviors well beyond, the four relatively square borders of this state. So I think we're at time, and I know we could go in a lot of different directions. Roberto and Phil, I am so grateful for both of you. You have been sage in instruction. Thank you. And for the work. For those of you that need to learn more about these guys, they're pretty public and available. Dig into their stuff, pay attention to it. Lots of opportunities to show up, bend a back, lean in, get a hand dirty in their work as well, which is another great way for city folks to get involved. With that, Catherine, I'm gonna throw it back to you. Move us along.
Thanks, you, Robbie. Thank you, Phil and Roberto. What a terrific panel. And as we move into the next speaker, I just want to point out, Robbie was talking about the work of the coalition in the political realm as well. And I really am excited and honored to introduce our next speaker. Coming up next, we have Kate Greenberg, Colorado's Commissioner of Agriculture. She was appointed by Jared Polis in December of 2018, leading and directing the over 300 employees in that particular department. And many of you know her from her over 12 years in the boots on the ground experience. And we're just delighted to have Commissioner Greenberg as our next speaker. Kate?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and everyone out there, it's great to be with you this afternoon. Before I get started, I want to introduce a special guest of my own, a young woman in agriculture, Lauren, who is with me today. She's shadowing, so she's with us virtually. But Lauren, I actually met when she was an FFA officer in Colorado. She just wrapped up her freshman year at Montana State University and is pursuing a dual degree in biotechnology and ag education leadership. And when we were talking about this meeting earlier, I think it was maybe a highlight for Lauren to be a part of this meeting. So Lauren, welcome.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for having me here today. I'm very excited. I'm taking a class this summer titled Empowering Women in Agriculture. And I could think of no better leader and female leader in agriculture than Kate Greenberg. And so I'm excited to be shadowing her today and to be with all of you. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, I want to just start with an update on the work that we have been doing down at the legislature, which by no means have we been doing this work alone, but really also want to take the time to just have a conversation with you all and hear what's on your minds and where we go from here. The work that you all have done as, the Regenerative Recovery Coalition has been very informative as we've been moving through this question of, how do we use the opportunities of this moment to set our state up for the future? And a lot of those questions have arisen out of COVID. They've arisen out of chaos and uncertainty and deep disruption. And now, of course, is a time of immense opportunity, and it is moving very quickly. So just kind of stepping back and how we're looking at this opportunity, especially around stimulus dollars, around increased awareness of agriculture and food and the systems that tie us all together. I really do see this moment as one that won't roll around again in our likely in our lifetimes. Maybe we'll start seeing these disruptions more and more, that's likely, but the way it's played out this last year is really remarkable, both the vulnerabilities and fissures that have been exposed, and then again, the coalitions that have formed, the opportunities that lie ahead. When it comes to the legislature, we're of course in full force, and things are moving quickly down there. All of these state level stimulus items and now a number of federal items are moving through the House and Senate. So each individual proposal for stimulus has required an individual bill. So we've got 4 I want to talk about, and apologies if it's redundant. 1181 is one we've worked on in close coalition with the Collaborative for Healthy Soils. Many of you are connected to that. And I want to start there because that's been such a phenomenal example of, I think, a role that state government can play in taking sort of a stepping to the side of the work that folks who live the work every day are doing. So zoom back, in the before times, 2019, first year of my tenure as Commissioner of Ag. We had been, in my past life with National Young Farmers Coalition, working quite a bit on soil health and questions of regenerative ag, though that term really was just starting to gain traction. And when I came on board at the department, it was clear that the opportunities for us to be a driver for Colorado on the national scene when it comes to soil health and supporting the leadership amongst farmers and ranchers in stewardship was immense. And so we took it and ran with it. One of the first things that happened was the convening of what would later become the coalition, or the Collaborative for Healthy Soils. That coalition really just had a life of its own, and I'm not sure if they're on today, but a number of the leaders, Helen Silver and Max, my staff, Cindy Lair, I think Phil and others, and then of course producers from around the state, Hunter, of course, got together and formed this coalition. The state was part of that, but we weren't leading that. And I think one strength that we really developed, which to me ties to this question of, regenerative recovery, was that it was a networked approach. It was a approach that came from the ground up. We as a state agency, we're really there to hear from the coalition, from the collaborative, about how we can best advocate for resources, establish a program, get those resources out to the communities we serve all across the state. And that's really, we've really been focused with our work since. The collaborative introduced 1181, which is making its way, is very close actually to the end of making its way through the legislature. At the same time, we put forward a bill for this legislative session, HB 1242, which is the creation of an agricultural drought and climate resilience office. This one for me encapsulates the question of soil health. It encapsulates our renewable energy work. It allows us to actually have an apparatus in the department to focus on voluntary incentive-based solutions for agriculture, led by agriculture. Stepping back, you know, for many of us who live on the Western Slope, right now is a really tough time with the drought. We have been through drought before. We've been through drought as a state. We're an arid state. But with Colorado River Basin policy right now, with the lake levels in Powell in particular, we are on the razor's edge when it comes to our water allocations, with a lot of producers actually not even receiving allocations this year from surface water. We've got basins across the state that have groundwater sustainability levels that are pushed back year after year because of conditions, including snowpack, stream flow, use across the board. So that is to say that farmers and ranchers are the first line of experiencing water scarcity, and they absorb that for the rest of us. Those of us who go and turn our taps on or our showers on or water the garden, we have water in the system, but farmers and ranchers go out to their head gate. They might not be able to turn it on right now. They go out to their wellhead or center pivot. They may not be able to turn that on right now. So we know this is a part of our future. We know that the state, in my mind, has a role to play in supporting producers in building that resilience. So this office, which HB 1242 would allow us to create, would create the infrastructure for being able to better address these realities. So those are two bills that are moving through. We've got two additional ones on the stimulus side, SB 234 and SB 235. The first one funds drought and climate resilience. So we've been working to integrate these pieces. The first two bills did not have fiscal notes. So we were gonna do all this work with resources we had. Now with stimulus, we have more resources. So with 234, that's about $3 million to drought and climate resilience. 235 is about a total of $5 million, much of that to renewable energy development, to our program called Acre 3, which is supporting producers looking to invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency, and then about $2 million to soil health. Now, some amendments that have been worked in there to support agrivoltaics, as well as $1 million for conservation districts. And we have 75 conservation districts across the state who are key to our work on the ground, supporting producers in meeting these challenges. So that's all to say what last year was a 10% budget cut, figuring out how to address climate and drought and the realities that producers face every day, is now millions of dollars in stimulus coming down to actually put into those buckets that we have created. So with that, I'll wrap up there. And I want to wrap up by saying, again, that none of that happened as a state agency alone. It's also my personal philosophy that whenever the state can be an advocate for local efforts, can support local efforts and get out of the way of what locals do best, the better. And I see that work with drought and climate. If we can help bring resources in from the state and federal level, partner with local entities, build coalitions, especially of unlikely allies, and focus on how we build resilience for the long term, then that's going to give us the greatest chance of ag remaining a driver of our economy, basically the anchor of our open space and natural beauty, and the opportunity for actual regenerative potential across Colorado. So with that, I'll hand it back to you all, and happy to have any conversation on your mind.
Thank you so much. We're going to pull in Hunter and as well as some audience questions, and then we can have a dialogue for the remaining time that we have.
Howdy, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us. Really, for me, truly a thrill to have you here. You and I sat in Jared's office and talked about all these issues just before the damn pandemic hit. And here we are. What is the chance of Colorado getting an agricultural carbon market?
Ooh, I think this is something we're just going to see mature rapidly over time. What we're doing our soil health initiative is what we've been doing administratively beyond the legislature. That's working with NRCS, working with a lot of you, Hunter, you've been a part of that, conservation districts, on how can we help advance our soil health work in a way that's led by farmers and ranchers. What we're doing right now is a pilot program. It's called the STAR program, which stands for Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources, working with dozens of producers around the state to help us build the forms for this STAR rating program. So the idea being you get essentially a baseline verification of practices. If this is a voluntary program, you volunteer, and then after a certain amount of inputs into your practices and sort of towards the outcomes that you're looking for, ideally you're going to increase the number of stars you have. Now, to your question, Hunter, my hope is that we build that platform that then attracts business to Colorado, because we're seeing across the corporate world, climate targets across the supply chain. So these big food companies who need to be, sourcing are going to be looking for a climate or carbon neutral supply chain. Colorado should be a leader in establishing that supply chain. So that's what we're building toward with our soil health initiative.
Yeah, Microsoft gave a ranch in Australia $500,000 for carbon sequestration. We ought to be getting that kind of money coming to farmers and ranchers here in Colorado.
Right.
What is being done to help get more small local meat processing up and running?
Yeah, this has been a big one for us through COVID and before, but of course, COVID really hit the accelerator on that one. A number of things. We have just closed on it was about a $300,000 grant targeted to processors across the state, small and mid-scale. We know, when the big guys shut down last year, all that demand, shifted, at least for a time being. And a lot of that demand has stayed on the small and mid-scale processors who are booked out 18 to 24 months in some circumstances. So we are, the 300,000, we're finalizing those grants, many of which are going to meat processors. We also, there's a bill in the legislature which is kind of going through the sausage making, if you will, of the legislative process, that would create a $30 million loan program that the CDA would establish, prioritizing lending for processors and lending for farmers and ranchers within their first 10 years of production. So again, working through all the details right now, but I think what that indicates is there is a common awareness of the need to focus on distributed, diversified, independent, small and mid-scale processors for meat and other products to, both support rural economies and opportunities for business and ag.
If individuals wanted to help your department, what could they do?
Oh, good question. I think a lot of it goes back to the coalition mindset. There's a lot of ways to plug in either directly with us or with partners that we work with regularly. I think the more support we have for farmer and rancher led solutions to some of the biggest problems we face, we need allies across the state. That's something we talk a lot about in ag. We're less than 2% of the population and dwindling. But with that, we're seeing, an emergence of people who are coming at it from new ways, from new walks of life, entering it from a new vantage point. I think the more that we get eaters and consumers on board with how important it is to support farmers and ranchers, the more we will build a coalition that has this real influence, both in policy and legislation, and also, our choices, as consumers.
Mute button, something that I know is near and dear to your heart. How do we get more young people into agriculture?
Well, I think, making it fun and making it lucrative, that goes back to the question of payments for ecosystem services or carbon markets. And we think about this all the time. How can we diversify business opportunities? And how can we do it in such a way that leads to other goals that we have or needs that we have as a state? Water conservation, climate mitigation, there's real challenges we face, and farmers and ranchers can drive solutions. Now, they can't do it on their own, because you think about one drought year and it sends you back, 3 years of progress, right? And that's what we're seeing right now with, ranchers having to cull herds and farmers having to lay off workers because there's not enough water. But with that, You know, I think there's just immense opportunity for creativity, for entrepreneurship, for young people to get creative on how we solve some of the biggest problems.
David Carlson asks, how can the graduates of the Colorado Ag Leadership Program be helpful?
Oh yeah, CALP. Gosh, we work so closely with CALP on, we support staff who go through the program, and we support the program as a whole. I think there is actually a lot we could do to increase that partnership, especially around these shared goals, how we communicate to folks outside of ag to win hearts and minds for how important ag is to the state. You guys as CALP members or fellows are so important to that story. And sharing that story. And that's a place I'd love to continue to work together.
And Liz Morgan asks, new agrotourism business on farmland. How can someone who wants to get into this get help from the state?
Oh, great question. Yeah, we partner with Colorado Tourism Office on agritourism promotion. I'd say the two best ways, and I can find the link after this and send it to you, Hunter. Our Colorado Proud and our markets team are very plugged in. And then our wine board is also very plugged into the tourism office. And through either channel, they can get you connected through the agritourism crew.
Kate, thank you. It is always such a pleasure to be with you. I truly appreciate all that you're doing for those of us who are producers, for everyone in the state who likes to eat. As Wendell Berry said, eating is an agricultural act. And just thanks for being there. And thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Thanks for all your work, everyone.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Greenberg. What an afternoon. Oh, we, during the panel, I think it was said that we're stumbling forward, and there's really no roadmap. But to get here, I think the other comment was, we're solving the biggest problems through collective actions starting today. And I just really, starting today, I want to thank all of you for joining and being part of a really special session. I also want to thank our sponsors, The Green Solution, Oatly, Villanova, Montagna Distillers, and Eco Products. And it's happening. The regenerative work is evident, and the excitement, I think, as we all participated today, really is contagious. So if you have not done so already, we ask you to come join us with the coalition. And if you're interested and already a member, we can help you find the right working group. The working group really are the gears in which we're making this happen. And to all of our members, and especially the Regenerative Ag and Food Systems Working Group for their assistance in really executing today's meeting and making it a success, I just want to thank you. But I also want to thank you for all the work that you're doing to create the future that we want in Colorado, a regenerative future. So with that, the meeting is officially concluded, and I just want to thank everyone again. And if you have time this afternoon and you want to continue the conversation in an informal way, perhaps raise a toast or a couple of toasts, come join us. We're going to keep this channel open, and we'd love to see you in further discussions and to see you at the coalition. Have a great rest of your day.